realized the motivation behind using these terms was to maintain a distance between us and the inmates. Today, I believe that attitude has caused more problems than anything else inside prisons. If I had it my way, all inmates would be able to call prison officers by their first name, but that notion is still frowned upon, even to this day. And finally, a few words of warning about this book. I'm not a professional writer. I tend to say what I feel and see. Sometimes it might seem a bit on the nose, but that's what it's often like in prison. Staff and inmates cut straight to the chase, which is both the best and the worst thing about life in jail. I've got no doubt there'll be prison staff and inmates lining up to take a shot at me for writing this book. I'll live with it, because the truth can sometimes hurt. Introduction. The Prison Detective. In some ways, I'm more like a detective than a prison officer, because I've always tried to use my own thirst for knowledge to help solve problems and crimes that have happened inside jails over the past 3 decades. I think I first picked up this investigative instinct by reading Sherlock Holmes books when I was a kid. Holmes taught me to not look at things in purely black and white terms. I learned to examine the grey areas in the middle, just like he did, because they often contain the answers in life. This hopefully makes my take on prison life different from any previous memoirs. I'm also not obsessed with the cliched brutality and supposedly dangerous aspects of life inside that are the main ingredients in so many prison books. I've worked in prisons for more than 30 years. I went from leaving school with virtually no qualifications to running some of the UK's biggest and most troublesome prisons. My personality has evolved in many ways alongside my career trajectory inside the prison service. I started off young and naive, and ended up as a governor with a paternal instinct and a single-minded determination to keep everyone in my prison safe, and also to try to change the system for the better. However, writing this book has forced me to re-examine my motivation in joining the prison service in the first place. Did I genuinely want to help the not-so-fortunate, or was I more interested in the challenge of taking on some of society's most dangerous characters? Throughout this journey, I've dealt with many seemingly insurmountable problems. These were situations and scenarios that were quite simply far beyond most people's comprehension. At the end of the day, I've always tried to show a more caring response to situations than many of my predecessors from the UK prison service's troubled past. I learned how to stop and consider situations, rather than run in with all guns blazing, metaphorically speaking, of course. No doubt this infuriated many traditional prison staff, but I've never wavered in my belief that patience and understanding must always take priority over punishment and retribution, because what you see is not always what you get inside prisons. Also, throughout this same journey, I've often had to be a therapist and marriage guidance advisor, as well as tackling sexual orientation issues with staff and inmates alike. Most people seem to feel comfortable talking to me about it all. My other half says it's because they can tell I've been through a lot of the same shit as them. More on this later. I'm not sure that's true, but what I have learned as a prison officer and governor is that you have to listen, and you have to learn, and you have to park your judgments on your doorstep every morning when you leave for work. This is prison life from both sides of the fence. Some of it reads ugly, while other recollections retain a softer centre. Either way, prison life has never stopped surprising me in good and bad ways. I'm not out to make a fortune from other people's despair either. I'm hoping in some ways to provide a self-help book for law-abiding citizens who can't get their heads properly around the reality of our prison system. You see, locking criminals up and throwing away the key is definitely not the answer. So what makes a good prison officer? If you've never been near a prison before, as a visitor or an inmate, how could you possibly know? Being a people person certainly helps. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be outgoing or overconfident.